There is an ancient image buried in the psyche of the world. A woman alone, standing on a mountaintop, cloaked in the stillness of night, the wind whispering through her hair like an old friend. No one stands beside her, yet she does not tremble. She is not waiting for a savior nor weeping for what might have been. She is whole, she is sovereign, she is enough. There exists within the collective unconscious an ancient archetype, one not often illuminated by the dominant narratives of society, but quietly residing in the symbolic fabric of myth, folklore, and the deep inner world. It is the image of the independent woman, not merely independent in the surface sense of financial or logistical autonomy, but independent in soul, in psyche, in spirit. She is a figure who has stepped outside the traditional structures, not because she was cast out, but because her path led her beyond them. She is not defined by absence, but by presence, her own. Carl Jung often spoke of the archetypes as the inherited possibilities of human experience. The independent woman is not a modern anomaly, but a timeless symbol. She is the wise woman of the forest, the oracle at Delphi, the wild woman who lives on the edge of the village, feared and revered, in equal measure. In dreams she may appear as the woman cloaked in raven feathers, guiding the dreamer into unknown territory. She is the self, awakened and unbound. To live without a man in this context is not merely to exist single or unattached. It is to embody this archetype, to journey inward and to claim one's own authority. And while modern culture may frame such a woman as alone, the deeper truth is she is often in deep communion, with nature, with the intuitive mind, with the unconscious. Her solitude is not a void. It is a womb, a sacred container where transformation occurs. The image of this woman unsettles the societal order precisely because she needs no one to complete her. She does not play by the rules that dictate a woman must be partnered to be validated, and in her refusal to submit to those unspoken demands, she becomes both threat and mirror, threatening to those who have not dared to know themselves without another, and a mirror to those who secretly long to. The independent woman stands as a reminder of what lies beyond dependency, beyond the archetype of the damsel or the caretaker. She reminds us that there is power in stillness, wisdom in silence, and sovereignty in solitude. Hers is not a life devoid of love, but one where love must meet her where she already is, whole, aware, and profoundly rooted in her own being. 2. Break free from the collective complex is to confront the invisible architecture of belief that has long shaped the feminine psyche. This complex, as Jung would define it, is not merely a personal wound, but a cultural inheritance, passed down unconsciously through generations, reinforced by tradition, literature, religion, and media. It is the deeply embedded narrative that a woman's identity, fulfillment, and purpose are tied inextricably to her ability to be partnered, desired, and chosen by a man. This belief does not operate only on the surface. It lives in the shadows of a woman's thoughts, in the small hesitations before she makes a bold decision, in the internalized question, will I still be loved if I go my own way? It is a haunting echo, reminding her to shrink, to wait, to please, to make herself more digestible, lest she become too much or too independent, as though those were curses rather than compliments. But when a woman begins to awaken to this collective spell, something remarkable occurs. She starts to question the roles she has been taught to play. She notices how her sense of value has been measured against standards that never truly reflected her depth, her creativity, or her essence. She begins to dismantle the inner scaffolding, built by years of cultural messaging, unlearning the belief that love must be earned through sacrifice or submission. This liberation is not a loud rebellion. Often it begins as a quiet internal revolt, a decision to choose herself, to listen to her own voice over the noise of expectation. It can happen in the middle of a marriage, or in the silence of a single room. It is not the external state of being without a man that signals the break from the complex, but the internal shift, the realization that her existence does not orbit around another. She is her own center. And as this awareness deepens, she begins to live with a new kind of gravity, one that is not defined by how others perceive her but by how truly she aligns with her soul. She no longer feels the need to apologize for her autonomy, nor to explain her choices. She stops performing and starts being. In doing so, she becomes a living antidote to the complex itself, a walking reminder that wholeness is not something granted by partnership but something remembered from within. This is the essence of individuation, to step away from the persona shaped by collective norms and to move toward the self. The woman who breaks free from the complex does not abandon love. She simply refuses to chase it. She knows now that real love, whether from another or from life itself, can only meet her at the level of her own authenticity. Solitude, when approached not as exile but as invitation, becomes a vessel for alchemy, the slow and sacred transformation of the self. For the woman who lives without a man, solitude is not a punishment or a deficiency, it is a crucible. Within its stillness, distractions fall away, performances dissolve, and the deeper voice of the psyche emerges like a whisper long buried under noise. It is here that she begins to meet the vastness of her inner world, not as something to be feared, but as something to be embraced. Jung taught us that true transformation does not occur in the presence of comfort, but through confrontation with the unconscious. Solitude offers this confrontation. It strips away the roles society assigns, the masks worn for approval, and the false self constructed to be lovable in someone else's eyes. What is left is the raw material of the soul, untamed, unexplained, and often unrecognized. In this silence, the woman discovers what she truly wants, what she truly values, what she truly believes, without the influence of a partner shaping the contours of her decisions. She may find that her own company is not lonely, but luminous, that her thoughts once doubted or dismissed hold wisdom, that her intuition once overridden in favor of compromise is a compass more reliable than any external guide. The solitude becomes a mirror, not the kind that reflects appearance, but the kind that reveals essence. Of course, solitude also invites shadow. It brings forth the ghosts of unmet needs, the ache of old wounds, the memories of past loves that did not see her clearly. But it is in facing these ghosts that she learns her deepest strength, not in denying her longing, but in witnessing it without collapse. This is the alchemy, turning isolation into insight, turning pain into power, turning the absence of another into the presence of herself. In time, the woman who once feared being alone may come to protect her solitude fiercely, not out of fear, but out of reverence. She understands now that it is in these quiet hours when no one is watching, that she grows roots deep into the soil of her being. And those roots will nourish her for a lifetime. There comes a moment, often unannounced but unmistakable, when a woman who has walked the path of solitude begins to feel a quiet synthesis within. It is the merging of opposites, the dance of the masculine and feminine energies that reside in every human soul. In Jungian terms, this is the sacred union of the anima and animus. For a woman, it is the moment when she no longer seeks externally what she has integrated internally. The animus, the archetypal masculine energy, is no longer projected onto men, but encountered, understood, and embraced within. This inner marriage is not romantic in the conventional sense. It is archetypal, psychological, and deeply spiritual. It may unfold slowly like the soft blooming of a night flower, through dreams, synchronicities, or sudden moments of clarity. The woman who once looked outward for structure, direction, and validation finds that she has become her own compass, her own source of strength. She no longer requires another to complete her, because the polarity within her has balanced and harmonized. The inner marriage births an unshakable self-trust. Decisions no longer hinge on the approval of others. She no longer waits for a partner to move forward, to create, to explore, or to become. She has become both the creator and the container, the animating force and the receptive wisdom. In the myths of alchemy, this is the conjunctio, the mystical union that produces gold not from metal, but from the psyche. This integration does not mean she closes herself off from the world or from love. On the contrary, she becomes more available to truth, to depth, to relationships rooted in mutual respect rather than silent desperation. Having met the masculine within, she is no longer drawn compulsively to those who represent it externally in distorted form. She no longer chases what she already contains. Her love becomes a gift, not a plea. In this inner union, she finds stability not through dependency, but through self-revelation. She can be soft without fear, strong without apology. She can create with discipline and feel with abandon. She can take up space without needing permission. The inner marriage dissolves the illusion of lack and plants in its place a profound fullness, a living reminder that everything she once thought she needed to find in another has, in truth, always lived inside herself. The world begins to look different when a woman no longer seeks love as a form of rescue but recognizes it as an expression of wholeness. When she no longer positions herself as a beggar at the gates of affection, she transforms the very nature of her relationships. What once felt like hunger, gnawing, insatiable, quietly desperate, gives way to a sense of sacred discernment. She no longer asks, "Will you choose me?" but instead wonders, "Does this resonate with the truth of who I am becoming?" This is a seismic shift, not only in behavior but in the very architecture of the psyche. Jung would call this a turning inward toward the self, a recognition that love cannot be truly given or received until one has first befriended the inner world. The woman who has stopped begging for love becomes sovereign. Her boundaries are no longer walls of defense but expressions of clarity. She does not harden, but she does refine. She does not isolate, but she does illuminate what she will and will not allow into the sacred circle of her life. There is a particular magnetism that arises in her presence, not because she demands attention, but because she no longer needs it. She is not empty, reaching outward. She is full, overflowing. And from this fullness she gives, not to earn affection, but because giving has become her nature. Her love is no longer laced with anxiety, fear, or performance. It is clean. It is fierce. It is free. In her relationships, there is no more shrinking, no more second-guessing, no more contorting herself to fit the mold of what someone else desires. She speaks from her center, listens from her soul, and walks away when what stands before her does not reflect the mirror of mutual respect. She knows now that compromise must never come at the cost of self-abandonment, and perhaps most radically, she redefines what it means to be loved. No longer seduced by intensity or drama, she recognizes love in presence, in honesty, in ease. She sees through the illusions of possession and performance. What remains is something quieter, but infinitely more powerful. A resonance between two whole beings, not a frantic dance between two fragmented ones. This is the hidden truth about the woman who no longer begs for love. She has become the love she once sought. And from that place everything changes. Not because the world around her is different, but because she now sees it through the eyes of someone who remembers she was never unworthy to begin with. There is a fierce grace that emerges when a woman begins to trust her own voice more than the opinions, expectations, or validations of others. At first, this voice may seem faint, almost imperceptible, buried beneath years of conditioning, silenced by politeness, and made hesitant by fear of disapproval. But once she chooses to listen, really listen, it begins to rise, steady and sure, from the depths of her being. This voice is not merely her opinion or her mood. It is the whisper of her intuition, the ancient knowing that has always lived within her. Jung described the process of individuation as becoming who you truly are, not who you've been told to be. For a woman to begin trusting her voice is to step into this very process, to allow her inner truth to guide her decisions, even when they are inconvenient, unpopular, or misunderstood. It is to sit at the altar of the self and honor what she hears, even if it leads her away from the roles she once thought she had to play. There is power in this reclamation. Her no becomes as sacred as her yes. Her silence no longer signals confusion but contemplation. She no longer feels the need to explain herself to those who are committed to misunderstanding her. There is a serenity in her resolve, not because she has all the answers, but because she has stopped outsourcing her clarity. She can make mistakes and still trust herself. She can change her mind without shame. She can walk away without bitterness because her loyalty is no longer to appearances, but to her own integrity. The woman who trusts her voice becomes dangerous, not in a reckless way, but in the way that all truth-tellers are dangerous. She is no longer easily manipulated, coerced, or shamed into silence. Her voice carries the resonance of someone who has stood in the fire of doubt and emerged unburned, and others feel it. In her presence, falsehood trembles and honesty takes root. To trust her voice is to declare that her lived experience is enough, that her intuition, her emotions, her body's signals are all valid forms of wisdom. She doesn't need permission to speak, to act, to choose. She has remembered that she is her own authority. And with that remembrance, she no longer begs for space in rooms that deny her essence. She builds her own temple, stands at its center, and speaks not to be heard but because the truth within her is too alive to be silenced. The woman who no longer waits to be chosen reclaims a power so deep. It reverberates through the ancestral lines of all those who came before her, those who silenced their desires, who bent their spines beneath the weight of approval, who dimmed their light in hopes that someone, anyone, might say, "You are enough." She is the one who stops the cycle. She no longer stands at the threshold of life hoping to be invited in. She walks through the door she built herself. To no longer wait to be chosen is not an act of arrogance, but of remembrance. She remembers that she is already chosen by life, by the divine, by the pulse of existence that flows through her veins. The need to be selected, validated, or adored by another dissolves, not because she has become hardened, but because she has awakened to her own belonging. She belongs to herself now. In Jungian terms, this marks the turning point from projection to integration. No longer projecting her worth onto someone else's gaze, she retrieves those disowned parts and welcomes them home. She no longer believes love is something to be earned through performance or perfection. She does not stand in front of a mirror and wonder what more she must fix. Instead, she stands in her wholeness, knowing that her being is not a question, but a statement. This woman no longer lives in delay, delaying her joy, her creativity, her becoming, until someone else affirms her. She stops contorting, stops shrinking, stops asking if she's too much. If she is too much for someone, she knows now they are simply not meant to walk beside her. She does not chase because she has stopped running from herself. She chooses herself every morning, in how she speaks to herself, in how she moves through the world, in what she allows and what she releases. Her choices reflect her knowing, and in doing so she magnetizes what aligns with that knowing, not from desperation, but from presence, not from fear, but from trust. She does not abandon the dream of love, but she knows now that true love will not ask her to abandon herself. This is not defiance for its own sake. It is sovereignty. It is the deep embodied understanding that waiting to be chosen is a betrayal of the self. She is the one she was waiting for. And in that revelation, she does not rise alone. She carries with her the quiet triumph of every woman who has ever wondered if she was allowed to choose herself. When a woman no longer compromises her peace for the comfort of others, something profound shifts in the architecture of her inner life. What once felt like kindness begins to look like self-betrayal. What once passed as compassion begins to reveal itself as a form of quiet self-erasure. She no longer confuses people-pleasing with love, nor does she wear her exhaustion like a badge of honor. She sees clearly now. Peace is not a luxury. It is a sacred boundary, a holy inheritance, a home she is no longer willing to leave behind. This does not mean she becomes cold or indifferent. On the contrary, she becomes even more attuned to the emotional undercurrents around her. But now she discerns. She listens with an open heart, but no longer absorbs what is not hers to carry. The compulsive need to fix, to mediate, to sacrifice, dissolves. She can say no with softness and yes with intention. She does not rush to fill silences or soothe every discomfort, because she trusts that not all tension must be resolved by her hands. Jung spoke of the importance of individuation, the process of becoming fully oneself. In this process, the woman recognizes that every time she compromised her peace to avoid rejection, she abandoned herself. Every time she smiled while bleeding inside, she whispered to her soul that others mattered more. But now, her loyalty has shifted. Her allegiance is to her inner clarity, her serenity, her knowing. She becomes a guardian of her own nervous system, no longer allowing chaos to plant roots in her sanctuary. There is a quiet, steady power in this stance. It does not shout. It does not seek applause. It simply says, I choose me. And this choice reverberates not just in her own life, but in the lives of those who witness her. She becomes a mirror for others to see what is possible when peace is prioritized over performance, when alignment is more important than approval. The world may call her selfish. It may label her difficult. But she has stopped translating her truth into a language palatable for those who benefit from her silence. She does not rage. She simply withdraws from what disturbs her soul. And in doing so, she cultivates a life that reflects the stillness, the depth, and the authenticity she once thought she had to trade for love. This woman no longer negotiates with chaos. She no longer apologizes for the space she takes or the boundaries she sets. She knows now that her peace is her power, and she will not give it away, not for comfort, not for approval, and certainly not for love that asks her to disappear. When a woman stops viewing solitude as a punishment and begins to experience it as a sanctuary, her relationship with herself changes at the very core. What was once feared becomes sacred. What once echoed with loneliness now hums with presence. She no longer waits for the world to fill her, for the phone to ring, or for someone to validate her existence. Instead, she meets herself in the quiet and finds that she is not empty. She is vast. Solitude, when embraced, becomes a temple for transformation. Jung spoke often of the necessity to descend into the depths of the unconscious, to sit in silence with the self and face all that lives within us. It is in solitude that the masks fall away, the noise dims, and the authentic voice of the psyche emerges. And it is here that a woman learns she is not the roles she plays, the love she receives, or the reflection in another's eyes. She is the observer, the dreamer, the creator of her inner landscape. In this space, she tends to her wounds with reverence. She no longer distracts herself from her grief or hides from her longing. She makes room for them at the table and listens. She honors the ebb and flow of her own emotional tides. In solitude, she remembers her power not because someone told her she was strong, but because she discovered the depth of her own resilience in the absence of applause. She becomes comfortable in her own company, not because she has hardened or given up, but because she has softened into herself. She reads what nourishes her mind, listens to what stirs her soul, and creates not to impress, but to express. Her time becomes sacred, her rituals intentional. Her energy no longer leaks toward proving, performing, or pleasing. It gathers, it roots, it rises. The woman who honors solitude learns to listen to the whispers of her intuition. She becomes fluent in her own language. She no longer panics in silence because she knows silence holds answers. She no longer fears being alone because she is no longer estranged from herself. Solitude is no longer a sentence, it is a sanctuary, a place of return, a space of becoming, and from this deepened relationship with herself she begins to move differently in the world. She chooses not out of lack, but from fullness. She enters relationships not to complete her, but to complement her. She does not settle for the sake of company because she knows the price of abandoning her own presence is too steep. She knows now. The richest love she can offer another must first take root within herself. There is a profound transformation that occurs when a woman finally accepts that her worth is not contingent upon anyone else's recognition or approval. This acceptance is like a sunrise after a long, dark night, a dawning light that warms every shadowed corner of the soul. It is the moment when she no longer asks, "Am I enough?" because she already knows the answer with unwavering certainty. This knowing is not born of arrogance, but of deep encounter with her own being, a recognition that she is inherently whole, complete, and deserving simply because she exists. Jung taught us that the self is the center of the psyche, the ultimate source of unity and wholeness. To come into relationship with the self is to step beyond the fragmented ego, which constantly seeks external validation and struggles with feelings of inadequacy. The woman who embraces her intrinsic worth ceases to be a prisoner of comparison, competition, or scarcity. She understands that these are illusions crafted by the ego's fear of separation, but the self knows no such limitations. This radical acceptance reshapes her entire existence. No longer tethered to the volatile tides of others' opinions or affections, she walks through the world with a grounded confidence. Her energy shifts from seeking to radiating. She no longer bends or breaks to fit someone else's narrative of her. Instead, she stands firmly in her own story, fierce and tender at once. There is a sacredness in this self-recognition that cannot be taken away or diminished by the judgments of the world. It is a fortress built from years of struggle, healing, and growth. A fortress that protects her from the insidious whispers of doubt. And within this fortress, she cultivates compassion for herself, not because she needs to soften or excuse her imperfections, but because she honors the fullness of her journey. The liberation that comes with accepting one's worth ripples outward. It changes how she relates to others, how she navigates love, and how she claims her place in the unfolding tapestry of life. She no longer settles for crumbs or tolerates disrespect because she has tasted the fullness of her own value. And, in doing so, she becomes a beacon for others, an embodied testament that true power lies not in being chosen, but in choosing oneself. This acceptance is not the end of the journey, but a vital threshold, a gateway to a life lived with authenticity, courage, and profound joy. It calls her to step into the world not as a fragment seeking completion, but as a radiant whole whose presence alone is a gift. And it invites every woman listening to this truth to remember, you have always been enough, and the world awaits the fullness of your awakening. As we come to the close of this reflection, let us carry forward the profound truth that living without a man or without any external validation does not signify lack or loneliness, but marks the courageous reclaiming of one's wholeness. Like the archetypes Jung explored, the woman who stands in her own light has navigated the shadows of doubt, fear, and conditioning to emerge as an embodiment of sovereignty and self-love. She teaches us that the deepest love we seek begins within, that the most powerful relationship we can cultivate is the one with our own soul. May this truth inspire each of us to honor the cycles of our own becoming, to listen to the silent wisdom of solitude, and to choose ourselves with fierce tenderness every day. For in embracing our intrinsic worth and trusting our voice and in refusing to beg for love or permission, we step into the fullness of our humanity. We become alchemists of our own destiny, transforming absence into presence, silence into song, and longing into radiant being. Let this be a call, not to rejection of connection, but to the invitation of authentic, soulful relationships that arise when we stand whole and unshaken. The world is hungry for such wholeness, and it begins with you.